My name is Sophia Bennett. I suppose every great story, even one about quiet, deliberate revenge, has a moment that sets everything in motion. For me, that moment was my 21st birthday, not because of the typical college-age milestones, but because of a gift that was so far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. It felt like a dream, or maybe a very well-funded practical joke. You see, my grandmother, Lillian, was a legend, not a celebrity in the traditional sense, but a true titan in the world of boutique luxury hotels. She built her empire from the ground up, starting with a single, run-down seaside inn she inherited from her own mother, and turning it into a collection of 6 exquisite properties spread across the coast and major cities. She had an eye for design, a mind for finance, and a reputation for being absolutely unyielding when it came to quality. People called her the Iron Orchid because she was both beautiful and incredibly tough. My relationship with my grandmother was the defining relationship of my young life. After my parents divorced when I was 10, and my mother, Brenda, quickly remarried a man named Scott, things at home became complicated. Scott was a smooth talker, perpetually unemployed, and always seemed to be looking for the next easy opportunity. He saw my grandmother's wealth, and by extension, our family, as exactly that, an opportunity. My mother, who had always been a little volatile, became increasingly distant, drawn into Scott's orbit and his grand, often foolish, schemes. Lillian, sensing the shift, quietly stepped in. She never made a fuss or criticized my mother directly to me, but she created a sanctuary. She paid for my private schooling, encouraged my interest in architecture, a passion we both shared, and spent every holiday, every summer vacation, teaching me about her business, about life, and about the importance of integrity. She was preparing me, though I didn't realize it then, for something monumental. So, when she invited me to dinner at her private penthouse apartment on the night of my 21st birthday, I expected a lovely meal, a beautiful heirloom piece of jewelry, perhaps a significant sum of money to help with my final year of university. What I did not expect was the leather-bound folder she slid across the mahogany table after dessert. She was wearing a calm, almost serene smile, the kind that always made me feel like she knew a secret the rest of the world hadn't quite figured out yet. "Happy birthday, my dear Sophia," she said, her voice soft but resonating with authority. "Even in private, I know you finish your degree next year, and you are already interviewing at those big firms. But I thought you might want a project of your own, something you can truly make your mark on." I opened the folder. Inside was a single, elegantly framed document. It was a deed of ownership. The name on the property was the Azure Coast Hotel. It was one of her original properties, a beautifully preserved 1920s landmark on the California coast, recently appraised at $50 million. My breath hitched. I looked up at her, trying to process the sheer, impossible magnitude of the number, the property, the gesture. My throat felt dry. "Grandma, I can't. $50 million. This is everything," I managed to stammer out. She chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "It's a magnificent piece of architecture, isn't it? It needs a fresh eye, Sophia, someone who understands how to blend the old bones with a new, sustainable future. Someone with your vision. It is officially yours. No strings attached. Consider it a trust, yes, but one you actively manage. The staff, the accounts, the whole enterprise. It is now the Sophia Bennett Hotel." I felt a rush of emotion, joy, certainly, but also a fierce, protective commitment to honor the trust she was placing in me. We spent the next hour talking, not about the money, but about the hotel, about my ideas for the rooftop garden, the potential for a new lobby layout, how we could incorporate more local art. It was pure, unadulterated excitement. It was the moment my career, my life, truly began. And then, the phone rang. Lillian looked at the caller ID, and a tiny muscle near her jaw twitched. It was my mother, Brenda. Lillian simply muted the ringer and set the phone face down. "She's probably calling to wish you a proper happy birthday," she said dismissively. We're busy, darling. Let's focus on the P&L statements. I want you to look at the quarterly maintenance budget for. Before she could finish the sentence, the service elevator doors that opened directly into the penthouse living room chimed, and my mother, Brenda, strode out, followed closely by Scott. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The warm glow of the celebratory dinner was replaced by a cold, sharp tension. My grandmother's calm demeanor did not waver, but her eyes, which had been sparkling with pride moments before, now held a deep, knowing reserve. Well, isn't this a cozy little scene? My mother said, her voice dripping with an artificial sweetness that always preceded an argument. She glanced at the deed on the table, instantly spotting the hotel's letterhead. Her eyes narrowed. Scott, never one for subtlety, immediately moved to the table. He picked up the leather folder and flipped through it. His face, usually set in a smug smirk, went slack with shock, then immediately hardened into calculation. 50 million, he breathed out. He looked at my mother and then back at Lillian. Brenda, do you see this? The Azure Coast. Lillian, you didn't tell us you were making such a substantial transfer of assets. Lillian, who remained seated, took a slow, deliberate sip of her filtered water. I didn't need to tell you, Scott. It is a gift to my granddaughter. My mother scoffed. A gift to a student? Lillian, be serious. Sophia is 21. She knows nothing about managing a complex, $50 million operation. She's an architecture student, not ACO. She'll run it into the ground in 6 months. I felt the blood rush to my face. The sheer unfairness of her dismissal, after years of my grandmother tutoring me, after I had spent countless hours studying the industry and the hotel's specific operations, was infuriating. Scott, however, was already in full pitch mood. He set the folder down with a sharp clap. Look, this is a family asset, a legacy. It has to be protected. The only sensible solution here, Lillian, is to have Brenda and me manage it. We have the experience. We can ensure the asset remains stable while Sophia finishes school. We can all manage it together as a family. He leaned over the table, his posture an attempt at professional authority that failed completely, making him look like a cheap hustler. He was demanding, not proposing. My grandmother turned her attention to me, completely ignoring Scott's ridiculous proposal. She looked me in the eye, conveying both a test and an instruction in a single glance. She was waiting for me to speak, to take ownership not just of the hotel, but of the situation. I took a deep breath, pushing down the instinctive urge to yell at my mother and Scott. My grandmother had taught me that in business and in life, the person who stays the calmest is usually the one who holds the power. I stood up slowly, picking up the deed and closing the folder. Thank you for your concern, Scott, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt. I met his eyes, which were full of greedy anticipation. But I don't require management. I have been studying under my grandmother's guidance for nearly a decade. I know the hotel, the staff, and the P&L statements better than anyone outside of Grandma's executive team. The Azure Coast is not going to be managed by a committee. It is not going to be a family collaboration. I paused and let the truth sink in. I am the owner now. And the first decision I will make as the owner is that I will be managing it myself. Absolutely not. The sheer finality of my statement hit my mother like a physical blow. Her composure shattered. The fake sweetness vanished, replaced by the familiar, cold fury I had grown up trying to avoid. You ungrateful little brat, she spat, her voice rising. After everything I've done for you, you think you can just cut me out? That hotel should have been mine. It's the only decent property left. I am your mother, and you will listen to me. Scott and I need a steady income, and this is it. Her sense of entitlement was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that because she was my mother, she was owed this inheritance. Brenda, my grandmother said sharply. But my mother was past the point of listening to reason. No, Lillian, she doesn't get to do this. You gave her everything, and she chooses to abandon her own family. Fine, my mother turned to me, her eyes blazing with a horrifying mixture of rage and wounded pride. If you want to play the CEO, then you are no longer welcome in my house. Pack your bags and leave this house tonight. You can find a cot in your $50 million hotel, Miss Owner. Scott, realizing the severity of the mistake, reached out a hand to restrain her. Brenda, wait, don't be rash. But it was too late. The words were out. The line was drawn. I stood there, holding the folder, feeling the weight of the moment. My childhood home, the place where I still kept my books and clothes, had just been weaponized against me. A threat to force me to surrender a gift that was rightfully mine. I didn't flinch, and I didn't cry. I simply looked at my mother, feeling a profound, quiet sadness for the relationship we would never have, and a new, steely resolve. Just then, my grandmother, Lillian, chuckled. It wasn't a mean laugh, or a triumphant one. It was a soft, almost theatrical sound, the kind a person makes when a plan, carefully laid out, finally reaches its unexpected climax. She pushed herself up from the table, smoothed the front of her expensive silk dress, and walked slowly over to a large, ornate cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened one of the drawers, which contained various family papers and documents, and pulled out another, smaller, yet equally important-looking document. She walked back to the center of the room, standing between me and my mother and Scott. She held the new document in her hand, her gaze moving from me to my mother to Scott, and then back to me, the quiet hero of the moment. She smiled a genuine, victorious smile. Brenda, you seem to have forgotten something. The Azure Coast was only a small part of my birthday surprise for Sophia. A good start, perhaps, but not the whole picture. She paused, allowing the silence to stretch, thickening the tension. My mother's face was a mask of confusion and mounting dread. Scott looked like a cornered fox. You see, my will has been completely rewritten, finalized, and notarized this afternoon, Lillian announced, her voice clear and ringing with finality. It states that upon my passing, Sophia inherits the remainder of my empire. All of it, the 6 hotels, the corporate accounts, the real estate portfolio, all 50 years of my life's work. She is the sole heir, the successor to the Bennett legacy. She tapped the new document with a manicured finger. And this little document is the corporate bylaws for the holding company, Bennett Luxury Hotels and Resorts. It dictates who can hold a managing position, and more importantly, who cannot. She held the document up for Scott and Brenda to read, then lowered it, looking pointedly at Scott. I had a specific clause added this morning. It states that anyone who has, and I quote, attempted to unduly influence, coerce, or extract assets from the owner or a direct heir of the company through threat or manipulation is permanently barred from any management, consultative, or financial position within the company. This includes, but is not limited to, my daughter Brenda and her husband, Scott. She then turned to me, her eyes softening. The moment you stood up, Sophia, and calmly told them no, you proved you were ready. You owned the room. You chose the legacy over the drama. And as a final layer of protection for you, my dear, I unveiled another surprise. She held the second document out to me, then turned back to my mother, who was staring at her, white-faced and trembling with shock. Scott looked utterly defeated. The $50 million hotel he thought he could leverage, now just a tiny, unreachable jewel in a crown that would never touch his head. My grandmother's voice dropped, becoming firm and cold, a tone reserved for a final, necessary decree. Brenda, you just told the future CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation to pack her bags and leave her home. That is a threat. That is undue coercion. That threat, your greed, has just cost you everything. You just cemented the final clause of the corporate bylaws, barring you and Scott from ever touching the Bennett legacy. Sophia will have no need to hire you, consult you, or even speak to you about the business. You have secured her safety and her inheritance, for which I suppose I should thank you. I looked at the deed in my hand, then at the bylaws, And finally, at my grandmother. The Azure Coast was a gift. The empire was my inheritance. The bylaw was my shield. The true genius of Lillian Bennett was not just in building an empire, but in ensuring that the wrong hands would never touch it. This wasn't just a birthday present. It was an education, a declaration, and a silent, masterful act of calm revenge delivered on my behalf. The story of my life had just irrevocably changed, and the battle for my future had only just begun. I took the bylaws from her hand, the paper feeling weighty and solid, a tangible piece of justice. I knew, in that moment, that this was just the beginning of the fallout, the slow, agonizing process of them realizing what they had truly lost. It would be a long story, but it would be told on my terms. With the calm and strategic precision my grandmother had taught me, I was ready to step into my new role, ready to face the music, and ready to let the long game unfold. The house, the betrayal, the threats, none of it mattered anymore. I had the hotels, I had the legacy, and most importantly, I had the quiet, unwavering power of the Bennett name behind me. This was my calm revenge. The air in the penthouse was thick and heavy, charged with the stunning finality of my grandmother Lillian's declaration. My mother, Brenda, stood absolutely frozen, her eyes wide, staring at the bylaw document now resting in my hands. Scott, ever the pragmatist, was the first to regain some level of manipulative composure, though the panic was evident beneath his strained smile. He tried to salvage the situation with a desperate appeal, the kind of oily charm he usually reserved for creditors. Lillian, now listen. You're being dramatic. A legal document written in an afternoon. We are family. This whole thing is ridiculous. We were just concerned for Sophia, making sure she's not overwhelmed. Brenda simply misspoke. We can talk about this. We can find a way to work together. Lillian didn't even turn to face him fully. She addressed the empty space slightly above his head. Scott, my lawyers are the best in the state. The documents are airtight, signed, witnessed, and filed. The bylaw amendment concerning undue influence was drafted years ago, after your last attempt to consult on a property renovation. Today, it was simply activated and permanently assigned to Brenda and you, based on the clear, recorded threat made against my primary heir, Sophia. You may have the best lawyers you can afford review it, but I assure you, you are barred permanently. The use of the word permanently hung in the air, a bell tolling the end of their hopes. Brenda, who had been speechless, finally found her voice, but it was thin and cracking, stripped of its usual sharpness. Mother, how could you? How could you cut your own daughter out completely for a mere hotel? I'm your child. You leave everything to her. She pointed an accusatory finger at me, shaking with disbelief and betrayal. I felt a pang of something complex, not guilt, but a deep, sorrowful recognition of her inability to see beyond her own immediate desire for wealth. The hotel wasn't the point. Her actions were. Lillian finally looked at my mother, and her expression was one of profound sadness, not anger. Brenda, I didn't cut you out. You cut yourself out. Years ago, I left you assets that would allow you to live comfortably, to start a new, dignified life. I didn't leave you my life's work. That distinction is earned, not given by birthright. I left my legacy to the person who showed interest, commitment, and, most importantly, integrity. Sophia has spent years learning what it means to build something valuable. You and Scott have spent years only looking for a way to take something already built. She paused, looking around the room, signaling the official end of the conversation. The dinner is over. Sophia and I have much to discuss about the immediate operational structure of the Azure Coast. I suggest you both leave. Now, my mother burst into tears, the kind of loud, dramatic sobs that always felt more about performance than genuine heartbreak. Scott, saying that the situation was irretrievable, grabbed Brenda's arm, his eyes promising a future reckoning that I knew would now be toothless. Come on, Brenda, we're leaving. We'll deal with this later, he muttered, pulling her toward the elevator. As the doors closed on their retreating figures, the silence returned, deeper and heavier than before. I was still standing, clutching the two documents, the deed and the bylaws, my hands slightly damp. Lillian walked over to me and gently placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. You handled that beautifully, Sophia. You kept your temper, you spoke facts, and you took ownership. That's what a CEO does. They don't react, they respond. She then looked down at the documents. Now, they are going to try every legal avenue possible. They will call, they will beg, they will threaten, and they will lie. They will try to leverage your relationship with your mother. But you have to remember what you stand for and what you're protecting. I looked at my grandmother, truly seeing the iron orchid, not just the loving figure. They'll try to use the fact that Mom told me to leave the house, won't they? Of course, she nodded. But you don't have to go back to that house, Sophia. That threat, as painful as it was, gave me the final piece of evidence I needed to activate the bylaw and ensure your future safety. Tomorrow morning, you move into the penthouse suite at the Azure Coast. It has been prepared for you. It will be your new home, your new office, and your fortress. You will be on site, fully operational, and completely unavailable to them. This was the next step in the calm revenge, not confronting them, but building an insurmountable distance and a strong foundation for my new life. It was about quietly taking power, not shouting about it. The following morning, I hired a professional moving service to collect my belongings from my mother's house. I didn't go. I didn't call. I sent a short, polite email to my mother, stating that I had accepted her invitation to leave and was now residing at the hotel, and that any future communication regarding my belongings should be directed to the moving coordinator. I closed it professionally, signing off as Sophia Bennett, owner and acting CEO. Brenda and Scott tried to contact me incessantly. The first few days were a barrage of angry texts from my mother, alternating between emotional pleas, how could you do this to your own mother? I'm heartbroken, darling, and sharp accusations, you're letting the old woman manipulate you. You'll regret this. I followed my grandmother's advice to the letter. Silence. I didn't block them, but I archived every message unread. I didn't answer the phone. I immersed myself in the hotel. Moving into the Azure Coast was like stepping into a demanding, yet infinitely rewarding, new reality. The penthouse suite was magnificent, overlooking the Pacific, but I barely noticed the view. My focus was on the books, the staff, and the operation. My grandmother had already established a brilliant, loyal executive team, and they greeted me with respect and caution. They knew my mother and Scott, and they were relieved to see me take the reins, not them. The first month was a whirlwind of meetings. I studied the detailed P&L statements, met with the heads of every department, and began implementing the architectural redesigns I had planned with my grandmother. My architecture degree was proving to be invaluable, allowing me to view the hotel not just as a business, but as a living, breathing structure. The revenge, in this phase, was subtle and constructive. I was succeeding in the very thing they claimed I was too incompetent to do. I made strategic, cost-saving decisions without sacrificing quality, impressing the veteran team. I spent my days walking the floors, talking to the housekeepers, the chefs, the concierge. I was learning the heart of the business, forging relationships built on mutual respect, not fear or entitlement. Meanwhile, Brenda and Scott began their legal assault. Their first move was to contest my grandmother's mental competence at the time she signed the deed. They requested an emergency injunction to freeze the hotel's assets. This was exactly what Lillian had anticipated. We had a brief, calm meeting with her primary attorney, Mr. Thompson, a man whose quiet confidence was as formidable as Lillian's own. They are claiming coercion and incapacity. Sophia, Mr. Thompson explained calmly. Standard first move. They will fail utterly. Lillian had herself examined by 3 independent geriatric specialists, all recorded on video, and we filed those reports with the deed. Furthermore, the bylaw amendment regarding undue influence was signed off a month ago with multiple witnesses. They don't have a legal leg to stand on, only desperation. The injunction was denied within 72 hours. The court stated that the evidence provided by Brenda and Scott was purely circumstantial and based on self-interest. while the evidence of Lillian's competence and intent was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Their second, more personal attack was to leak a fabricated story to a local, sensationalist online tabloid. The headline read, "College dropout steals $50 million family hotel in last-minute grandparent betrayal." The article implied I had taken advantage of my ailing grandmother to cut out my devoted mother, who had supposedly managed the family home and cared for Lillian. It was a blatant, hurtful lie. I felt a surge of righteous indignation. This was the moment where my composure was truly tested. My first instinct was to draft a fierce, detailed rebuttal, exposing their lies and manipulations. Lillian, who was enjoying a well-earned vacation in Europe, called me. She hadn't left me alone to fend for myself. She was simply ensuring I learned to fight my own battles, with her strategic guidance from afar. "Sophia, did you see the trash the tabloids printed?" she asked, her voice light, as if commenting on the weather. "Yes, Grandma. I want to sue them for defamation." "No," she said simply. "That's what they want. They want you to get dragged into the mud with them. They want the distraction. They want the public fight. That's their domain. Our domain is quiet, overwhelming success. But the lies about you, about me manipulating you, the people who matter, the financial institutions, the partners, the staff, they know the truth. The general public reads a headline and forgets it by tomorrow. You sue, and you give the story a second life. You give them exactly what they crave, attention." She paused, and I could hear the wisdom in her silence. "The calm revenge is this. Don't reply. Don't acknowledge the noise. Instead, issue a press release to the Wall Street Journal and Forbes regarding the Azure Coast's new, aggressive, multi-million-dollar capital improvement plan, including your innovative sustainability design projects. Show them a CEO focused on success, not slander. Let your actions, your progress, your value be your only reply." It was brilliant. I took her advice. I ignored the local noise and worked with the hotel's PR team to craft a detailed, forward-looking press release focused on my architectural vision for the property, emphasizing my qualifications and my commitment to the legacy. The national and industry press, which was far more important to the hotel's reputation and my credibility, picked up the story. The small, putty tabloid piece was instantly drowned out by a wave of positive, professional press highlighting the young visionary takes reins of luxury empire. The contrast was stark. They were fighting in the dirt. I was building on the sky. This was the core of the calm revenge. Every attack they launched, every moment they wasted on malice, I countered with a constructive, strategic step forward. They were hemorrhaging energy and money on lawyers. I was investing in the hotel's future. A few months passed. The silence from me was deafening to them. They were running out of legal options and were blocked by the corporate bylaws. The only way forward for them was to try a direct, emotional appeal. One evening, as I was leaving the hotel to visit my grandmother's lair, Scott was waiting outside the entrance, leaning against a luxury sedan. He was wearing a suit that looked slightly too tight, clearly trying to project an image of power he no longer possessed. "Sophia, finally, I need 5 minutes," he said, trying to sound authoritative. I stopped, but kept a polite, professional distance. "Mr. Scott, my grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, handles all communication regarding the estate and the corporate structure. You can reach him at." "Cut the corporate talk, Sophia. This is about your mother. She's sick, truly sick. All this stress, all this fighting, it's killing her. She needs help, financial help. We are struggling. We just need a modest monthly allowance for medical bills. As your mother, she deserves that much." The emotional blackmail was thick. He was trying to invoke the mother-daughter bond that she herself had severed. I looked at him, not with anger, but with a cold, clear assessment. "Scott, I'm sorry to hear that my mother is unwell. My grandmother took great care to ensure that all her beneficiaries, including my mother, were left financially secure enough to cover all reasonable living expenses, including medical care, provided they didn't try to spend or leverage assets they didn't own. My mother has access to those funds. I met his desperate gaze. Furthermore, my grandmother's bylaws explicitly bar me from any financial interaction, consultation, or management with you or my mother due to your attempts at undue coercion. I legally cannot give you any corporate funds. If you truly believe she needs more assistance, you should consult the funds she already possesses and work with her financial advisor, who is completely independent of the hotel operations. He sputtered, realizing his carefully rehearsed script was failing. But that's not enough. She's your mother. You can override this. You can just sign off on a personal loan. Mr. Scott, I stated, placing my hand on the car door handle, preparing to leave. The woman who demanded I pack my bags and leave my home, solely because I refused to hand over my legal property to her, forfeited any right to special consideration from the owner of this corporation. I am following the bylaws established by my predecessor to the letter. This conversation is over. I got into the car, closing the door and instructing my driver to pull away. As we drove off, I watched Scott in the rearview mirror, standing alone on the curb, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The realization that he had definitively lost, not to a screaming match or a lawsuit, but to a carefully constructed legal barrier and my own calm resolve, was the true taste of revenge. I hadn't destroyed him. I had simply walked away and built my own impenetrable world, leaving him stranded outside the gates of the legacy he craved. The journey was long, but every step was solid, quiet, and meaningful. The confrontation with Scott outside the Azure Coast was the last real direct attempt by my mother and him to breach the walls I had built. It solidified in my mind that the legal and physical separation my grandmother had orchestrated was the only path to peace and success. The calm revenge wasn't about seeking their downfall. It was about elevating myself so high that their actions and attempts at sabotage became completely irrelevant to my new reality. In the months that followed, I stopped even thinking about them as antagonists. They became a historical problem I had solved, a necessary hurdle I had cleared. My focus shifted entirely to the business, and the results spoke for themselves. I poured my passion for architecture into the Azure Coast. We launched the Capital Improvement Project, starting with the redesign of the lobby and the creation of the sustainable rooftop garden I had discussed with Lillian on my birthday. I worked closely with the hotel's designers and engineers, not just as a CEO signing off on budgets, but as a hands-on visionary. My previous training and my final year of architecture school had given me the technical language and expertise to command respect from the contractors and the veteran team. The staff saw me, the young owner, on site at 6 a.m., reviewing blueprints and discussing supply chain logistics. They saw dedication, not distraction. Morale soared. The hotel felt alive, infused with fresh energy and purpose. 6 months after that explosive birthday dinner, I reopened the newly renovated sections. The launch was a huge success. Industry analysts praised the seamless blend of the hotel's historical elegance with modern, green technology. Architectural Digest featured the rooftop garden, calling it a masterpiece of urban sustainability. Occupancy rates hit a 20-year high, and the Azure Coast became the darling of the luxury travel press. I had proven my mother and Scott wrong, not with words, but with tangible, undeniable results that were visible on the quarterly financial reports. The hotel's valuation had already begun to increase, not just because of my grandmother's name, but because of my management. This silent, constructive success was the sweetest part of the revenge. My grandmother, Lillian, returned from her trip and was immensely proud. She wasn't interested in the financial metrics as much as the how. "You didn't just preserve the asset, Sophia," she told me during one of our quiet afternoon teas in the new penthouse office. "You enhanced the legacy. That takes true ownership. You proved that greed and desperation, no matter how loud, can never overcome quiet, focused competence." But while I was succeeding, the consequences of my mother's and Scott's choices continued to unfold. exactly as Lillian had predicted they would. Their attempts to sue, appeal, and threaten had cost them a fortune. Scott had leveraged the few assets they did have, including their primary residence, to pay for high-powered, albeit ultimately ineffective, liars who promised them a quick win against my grandmother's estate. When the last appeal regarding the bylaws was dismissed by the federal court, they were financially gutted. The comfortable funds my grandmother had left my mother were quickly exhausted, not by medical bills, as Scott had claimed, but by legal fees and their refusal to adjust their extravagant lifestyle. They couldn't face the reality of downsizing and working for a living. They were stuck in a cycle of entitlement and debt. My grandmother, still operating with that perfect, detached strategic calm, ensured I was kept informed, not to gloat, but for educational purposes. She wanted me to understand the full arc of consequences. They will inevitably attempt one final, desperate maneuver, Sophia. They will try to find a weakness in the foundation you have built, or, failing that, they will attempt to appeal to your empathy as a daughter. Lillian advised me, this is the moment of final justice, and you must remain absolutely firm. Your compassion for their self-inflicted wounds must not compromise the integrity of the business. The final maneuver came shortly before the first anniversary of my birthday dinner. I received a registered letter from a small, local law firm, not from their former high-profile corporate counsel. It was a bankruptcy filing, and buried within the lengthy documents was a personal letter from my mother. The letter was heart-wrenching, expertly crafted to evoke every ounce of guilt she thought I might harbor. She detailed the loss of their home, the crushing debt, and claimed that Scott had left her, unable to cope with the financial ruin. She painted a picture of herself, alone and ill, begging her daughter, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar empire, for a lifeline. She didn't ask for the hotel back, but for a small, non-repairable personal grant, just enough to get a small apartment and stabilize her health. I sat with the letter for an entire day. This was the hardest test of all. The professional side of me, the CEO, knew this was a calculated attempt to leverage emotion where law had failed, a clear violation of the spirit, if not the direct letter, of the corporate bylaws. The personal side, the daughter, felt the deep ache of the loss of my mother, even if she had caused it herself. I called Lillian. I read her the letter. It's persuasive, isn't it? She said, her voice steady. It is. And if Scott is truly gone, and she is truly alone and ill, what choice do I have? Grandma, she is still my mother. Lillian paused, letting the weight of my moral dilemma settle. Sophia, she is your mother, yes, and you are a generous person. But let's look at the facts calmly. She has a sizable trust fund, completely independent of the business, meant for her comfortable maintenance. Where did those funds go? They were spent, likely by Scott, on the legal fight against us. Exactly, she chose to prioritize a greedy, futile fight against her own family over her financial stability. And Scott is not truly gone. He is simply maneuvering. They are testing you one final time, trying to find a hole in the armor. She then offered the solution that embodied the true spirit of calm revenge justice with a safety net, but no compromise on control. Here is what you will do. You will not reply to the letter personally. You will instruct the lawyer handling the bankruptcy to state the following, clearly and concisely: the Bennett estate, under my direct instruction, is willing to purchase a small, non-luxury annuity to cover your mother's basic living expenses, including rent and medical insurance, for the next 10 years. This payment will be made directly to the service providers, the landlord, the insurance company. This is a measure of compassion, not an admission of liability or a reversal of the bylaws. She continued, the crucial part: this annuity must be placed under the strict, independent trusteeship of Mr. Thompson and the estate's financial manager. Your mother and Scott will have no access to the capital, only the direct, non-transferable payments for her needs. The paperwork must be drafted to clearly state that this is a personal, voluntary act of charity from Sophia Bennett, and it carries a non-negotiable condition: that she and Scott must legally cease all contact and communication with you and the Bennett Luxury Hotels and Resorts Corporation, and formally withdraw all remaining challenges forever. It is a lifetime non-disclosure and non-challenge agreement purchased with her comfort and security. It was brilliant. It was compassionate enough to satisfy my conscience, giving her a guaranteed, dignified existence, but ruthless enough to permanently protect my business and my peace. It was justice delivered on my terms. I followed the instructions precisely. The offer was presented through the lawyers, devoid of emotion. My mother, cornered and broken, had no choice but to accept. The financial comfort she gained was the very thing she had forfeited by her greed. But now it came at the cost of her final claim on me and the legacy. The final documents were signed 6 weeks later. I was told that when my mother signed the final legal agreement permanently barring her from any contact with me or the company in exchange for her basic financial security, she cried, not out of sadness, but out of sheer, exhausted defeat. She had lost the fight, the house, the money, and most importantly, her relationship with me, all for the temporary, toxic promise of $50 million. My grandmother and I watched the news reports a few months after the settlement. The Azure Coast had just won a prestigious global hotel award. I was standing in the lobby, surrounded by the staff, beaming with pride as I accepted the award. It was a national broadcast. Do you think they saw that? I asked Lillian quietly. She smiled. I'm certain they did. That is the final act of your calm revenge, Sophia. You did not just survive them. You did not just protect the legacy. You grew it. You excelled. And every time they see your name or hear of a Bennett Hotel's success, they are reminded of the price of their own terrible choices. You gave them silence, and in return, you built a symphony. I knew then that the cycle was truly broken. My revenge wasn't loud or destructive. It was an act of creation, a lifetime built on quiet strength and strategic patience. The $50 million hotel was just the starting point. The real victory was the peace and the empire I was building, one successful day at a time. The battle was over, the legacy was secure, and the CEO was me. I hope you enjoyed this journey into quiet strategy and family drama. If stories of turning betrayal into brilliance and fighting back with facts instead of fury resonate with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who appreciates a well-planned, calm revenge. And don't forget to subscribe to my Calm Revenge for more detailed, real-life stories about overcoming challenges with grace and strategy.